Hello, it's Alison here, welcoming you back to the Gardening by Design box of tricks, where we are talking about pruning small trees and shrubs. Since watching the explanations in part 1, I hope that you've been out into your garden, deciding which plants you want to prune and why, and possibly peered into the centre of a few to see if there is any natural new growth at the base. Now it's time to look at the detail of exactly how you achieve those pruning objectives. Pruning small trees and shrubs. Part 2. Shapely and healthy plants. Right at the start of the first video, I told you that there are two separate motivations for pruning. Do you recall what they are? If you need a clue, they are relevant at different times in the life of a tree or shrub. Well remembered. Firstly, to change the shape and guide the plant as it grows so that it suits the gardener better. And secondly, to renovate a specimen that has become overgrown and tangled. Part 1 identified 6 ways and types of pruning. In part 2, we start to look at shaping the plant as it grows and keeping it healthy. And we'll examine the first 3, housekeeping, formation, and raising the canopy. Before we dive into the details though, there is one more vital piece of information. Part 1 of this topic explained what pruning is. Now you need to know what pruning is not. Right up front, let's get it clear that pruning is not topiary or hedge trimming. Both of these are fine techniques. Hedge trimming is necessary and can be decorative. And topiary does change the shape of a shrub, hopefully to something more artistic. But pruning is quite different, as the following example demonstrates. Remember that removing the tip of a branch or stem encourages multiple buds to break and grow from just below. Imagine that you want to maintain the size of this shrub in the drawing so that it doesn't get any bigger year on year. We'll have a look at a small piece in detail. Snipping away to take 10 to 15 centimetres from the end of every twig will of course make it that much smaller. This is shown in the red lines in the drawing. But we know that by removing a small amount, including the growth bud, from the end of each twig, we encourage more shoots to grow out. The shrub then regains its original size, so once again we snip away and haircut each twig. What do you think will happen next? Well, of course, each cut again provokes 2 or 3 new shoots. The same process repeats itself, so over a few years the plant becomes more and more dense and more full of interlaced twigs. This solid bird's nest effect is exactly what you want for a hedge or a topiary shape. It is not what you want for a specimen shrub. The latter should look natural, as if it has not been pruned at all. This usually means an open framework of a few branches and plenty of light and air reaching the centre, like this elegant acer. The main difference is in the number of cuts that are made. When you prune, you create a strong open framework of branches and you make fewer individual cuts, but remove a larger piece of wood each time. So it should be simple to see that repeated hair cutting is not what we mean by pruning. And now another question for you. What are the correct tools for pruning? When you prune, you select a single stem and cut it with an appropriate cutting tool. Secateurs for smaller jobs, loppers, which are really like gutsy secateurs on long handles. This thing in the centre with the strings is a long-handled pruner, secateurs on the end of a 2 or 3 metre pole, and a string to effect the cut. A pruning saw, the curved blade saw at the end, or a small bow saw, particularly if you're dealing with larger branches and trees. Each of these cuts a single stem, And then you step back every couple of cuts, look at it from a slightly distance, and decide what more needs to be done. So what tools do you not need when pruning? Yes, you do not simply glide a hedge trimmer over the entire surface in one sweeping movement or use a pair of shears. So to summarise, pruning is not topiary or hedge trimming. Pruning creates a strong open structure allowing light and air to reach the centre. You choose a single branch to cut and review progress frequently, whereas topiary shapes and hedges are formed of dense bushy branches and twigs. Well, now that you know what pruning is, what it is not, and what tools to use, we can get down to the real business of the practicalities of the different ways of pruning. One proviso here, this is an introduction to pruning, and in 1 hour you can get a real grasp of the principles and practices, but we can't look at the specifics and foibles of every tree and shrub that you might come across. So it is a good idea always to refer to a reliable website or book for details, and this is particularly important for pruning fruit trees and bushes, where it can vary even with the variety of the fruit. You will certainly be much better able to interpret and apply the information with confidence after finishing this topic. Back to the practicalities of pruning then, starting with housekeeping. The definition of housekeeping pruning from part 1 was the removal of dead and damaged wood and branches that are rubbing or badly placed. Dead and damaged wood can be cut out whenever you see, but in general, late autumn or early winter is the time to take a look at shrubs and small trees for housekeeping, but always avoid pruning on a frosty day, as the new cuts can be susceptible to frost damage. The first aim is to maintain the health of the plant, for example, preventing dead stems from dying back further into healthy wood and reducing the likelihood of disease entering where branches are broken or split. Housekeeping also includes reducing the height of some tall summer flowering shrubs in late autumn, such as this buddleia. Larger hydrangeas and shrub roses also benefit. This prevents long stems being broken by winter storms and roots being loosened in the ground if the whole plant is battered by the winter winds. You might see the term windrock for this. The second aim is to gently tweak the shape and keep the centre open so that light and air reach all parts and you maintain an attractive balanced outline. This is done by removing weak stems and those growing into the centre and crossing over the main structural branches. In this rose, I have also removed the very thin whippy tops from the main stems. This is a species rose, Rosa glauca, and it requires very little other pruning. Since we're talking about the health of the plant, this is a good point to mention that you always cut back to a live shoot or bud, or if you cannot see a bud, then to a leaf, as we know that the leaf joint is where the buds will be under the bark. The reason for this is that sap only flows up a stem because there is a pull from the leaves or the growing shoots above it. If you prune or deadhead leaving a snag, like on this rose, there is nothing growing above to pull up the sap, so the snag dies, clearly shown here where it has turned brown. If left, the previously healthy stem below the new shoot may also die back, and you lose the regrowth. Roses are particularly susceptible to this, so it is important always to cut back to just above a healthy bud, as shown in this photograph, where the shoot is clearly growing away happily. Okay, so now we'll recap housekeeping, and this time it's your turn. The birds will twitter quietly in the background while you fill in the gaps. Okay? The main aim of housekeeping is to maintain the health of the plant by removing dead and damaged wood. Also, cut out branches that cross and may start to rub. Housekeeping should be done once a year, even if you have no other pruning to do, because you do not want to restrict the size or change the shape of the plant. And on to formation pruning. In part 1, we said that this is done in the first few years to create an open and airy structure, especially in fruit trees. You're aiming at a balanced framework, allowing light to the centre so that you get plenty of fruit that ripens evenly. Take a look at ornamental trees and shrubs too, to avoid congestion building up in their early life. It is much better to make small adjustments right at the start, as shown in this young apple tree, than to allow a tree to reach the height you want and then try to thin it and shape it. The exact shape that you create is a matter of choice. The tree on the left has a single trunk called the leader, and a reduced number of side branches have been retained, with plenty of space in between for the fruiting stems to develop. Other shoots on the leader are removed. The tree on the right has been pruned to form an open centre, where the single main leader has been taken out, allowing 3 similar sized branches to form the main structure. Look at this stunning witch hazel or hamamelis. They naturally grow as a multi-stem large shrub with a vase shape and need plenty of space and little pruning. But a bit of judicious work in the early years on the framework can make sure that you have the perfect form on this and other multi-stem shrubs. After those examples of what you might be trying to achieve, you should be able to identify the branches to keep and remove. But the question remains, how? Attacking a precious or newly purchased plant with sharp tools can be an anxious moment, but there's no need to panic. I have already suggested that you consult more detailed information if you are pruning fruit trees, and this is especially true if you're starting with a single stem tree in its first or second year. But, as always, the important basic guidelines apply equally to fruit and ornamental specimens. If you want to divert growth to open out the basic framework of a young tree, cut back to a bud facing outwards. The new branch will then grow out away from the main trunk and giving you a more airy centre. If you want to even up an unbalanced shrub, cut back the weaker stems much further than the stronger ones. As we established in part 1 of this topic, this encourages vigorous new growth the following season and will help to restore balance. If you are removing a branch, cut right back to where it emerges from the parent stem, just after the bulge. You might see the term collar for this. The branch at the left of this junction looks fine, but in fact it curves back towards the centre of the shrub a little bit higher up, wraps itself right back round the main stem. Clearly the wrong position when we want an open centre. I pruned it out completely with a pruning saw, and here you can see that I have just left the bulge at the base, but otherwise it's cut quite flush with the stem. Always support the branch that you're cutting off so that it doesn't fall and strip bark from the parent branch before you finish cutting. The fresh cut is quite clear to see, but over time it will darken, like this hibiscus. If formation pruning is done when the branches are still small, of course, the cuts are much less obtrusive as the plant grows. Most formative pruning is done when the plants are dormant. Late autumn to early winter is ideal, avoiding frosty conditions so that the cut surface isn't damaged. You need to be careful of pruning in late winter, as the sap in woody plants starts to rise again before you see the buds break and leaves unfurl in spring. And some plants, including grapevines, can bleed a huge amount of sap, can be enough to weaken the plant. In addition, there are exceptions to dormant pruning, and the most common is everything in the cherry and plum families and peaches. These are pruned only in mid to late summer because they are very susceptible to diseases entering through the cut surfaces. Pruning when the sap is flowing gently helps to prevent this. This also includes ornamental cherry trees grown purely for their blossom, not just the fruiting varieties. The technique for formative pruning is exactly the same, you just do it at a different time of year. Formation is all about pruning and shaping trees and shrubs when they are young to create a framework for many years to come. Prune to a bud facing in the direction you want the new branch to grow. Cut right back to the parent branch if removing a stem so that you do not leave a snag to die back. And cut weak growth hard back to even up an unbalanced shrub. In part 1, we defined raising the canopy as the removal of side branches up to the desired height to create clear stems. The canopy, by the way, is the term for the leaves and the small twigs that carry them, as distinct from the main branch and stem framework. This pruning is best done when the plant grows, in which case it really becomes part of formation pruning. I'm separating it out here because you may inherit shrubs when you move into a garden, for example, and decide to raise the canopy when they're already fairly mature. This is absolutely fine too. This acer has been pruned so that you can see the garden beyond and appreciate the multi-stem structural form. In a mixed border, it can be a useful technique to allow underplanting by letting light in and giving greater plant interest in the same ground area. You can see where branches have been removed recently because the cut surfaces are still pale. And also, once you know what to look for in the shape, you can see where earlier pruning has been done to take out branches growing into the centre. Raising the canopy can be useful on a much less dramatic scale too. This bay tree is in my herb garden, and I keep the bottom 30 centimetres or so clear, so that low-growing herbs get enough light to grow around the bottom. And now we're done for part 2. We have looked at the first 3 ways of pruning, to take your plants from initial planting to maturity, and to keep them in good health with an annual check-up. And we have established that pruning and topiary are most definitely different techniques for different outcomes. It's homework time, and I reckon that you will definitely need a tea break after this. Take a walk around the garden and see if there is any housekeeping pruning that can be done straight away. Decide if you have young trees and shrubs that would benefit from formation pruning. Diarise this for the appropriate season. And if you have large shrubs in mixed planting, think about raising the canopy to let in light and allow underplanting. The final video in this topic looks at the remaining ways of pruning, maintaining a stable size, and how to recover or regenerate shrubs that have become overgrown and tangled. You will also see how you can provoke plants to produce much larger leaves than usual. Great for a tropical effect. See you soon.